This is not healthy for your body.
Do you know what's secretly fueling your sugar cravings? The answer might surprise you. Sugar. It's not just sweet, it's a silent saboteur of your gut health. Sugar isn't just a guilty pleasure, it's a hidden health hazard. Let's break the sugar cycle together and take control of our gut health.
Now let me make it sound even more dramatic. Now, a quick question. What will happen if I would consume this for the next 100 days? My name is Maxim Felix, the Managing Director of MicroHeris. And in this session, I'm going to explain the whole process in which the simple carbohydrates are broken down, and when overly consumed, they can lead to complications due to high glucose. Complications such as diabetes 1, diabetes 2, there is obesity, there is heart diseases, there is cancer, there is basically all lifestyle diseases are as a result of consuming too much glucose or having too much glucose in the body. And with me, I have the perfect example and illustration that I can use to describe the whole process in which glucose from the food that we consume can lead to diabetes. And in this sweet product, we have a lot of sugar, a lot of wheat content, a lot of starch. Basically, all this is carbohydrate. Now, allow me to describe now the process in which it goes through our digestive system until it is absorbed. First, when you eat it, digestion of carbohydrates starts in the mouth. The saliva in our mouth, apart from wetting the food, it also has digestive enzymes called salivary amylase. Now, what are salivary amylase? These are enzymes that break down specific carbohydrates called starch, which is in our food. They break the starch to polysaccharides and sometimes to even disaccharides. If you are not sure what I'm talking about when I mention disaccharides and polysaccharides, make sure you check the previous video and make sure that you subscribe to this channel. After now crushing the food in our mouth, it is then swallowed. After this carbohydrate food reaches the stomach, that is the organ, no chemical digestion occurs in this part, and it's because the stomach is very acidic and the enzymes that break down any carbohydrate will be deactivated. That is why. Now that carbohydrate food, when it reaches the duodenum, that is the first part of the small intestine, in the junction between the pipe from the pancreas and to where it meets the small intestine, is where now the pancreatic juice is secreted. What does pancreatic juice contain? It contains some amylase enzymes. Now this pancreatic amylase breaks down even the polysaccharides to even maltose and dextrose. These are the forms of sugar that we talked about in the previous video. After this carbohydrate food is acted upon by the pancreatic amylase, it proceeds to go to the small intestines. So this is where the walls of the small intestines secrete fluid with enzymes. Enzymes that further break down the carbohydrate to the smallest and even the tiniest, the simplest forms of sugar. So let's unpack that. We have a few digestive enzymes that break down any carbohydrate form of food to the simplest forms of sugar in the small intestine. Some few examples include lactase. These are digestive enzyme. We have maltase. Let's take a look at our food content. It has maltose. There is a specific enzyme called maltase. It will break down the maltose to 2 glucose molecules that will be absorbed by the body. In our food, there is also sugar, which is sucrose type of sugar. Now, remember, this is a disaccharide form of sugar, so it will require an enzyme called sucrase so that it can further break down this sucrose type of sugar to glucose and fructose. Alright? We have gone through the whole process in which our food has been digested. We have ingested it and it is being digested until now it is now being absorbed by the body in form of simple sugars. Now let's see what is happening in the blood. So there's something that we call blood sugar. It is when these simple sugars are absorbed by the body and the level of sugar rises in the bloodstream. Alright. Now this blood sugar is very important, and it is because it enables us to do work. It provides energy to our body organs so that we can work. Now this blood sugar isn't supposed to be too high or even too low. It has a range in which it is supposed to operate on. Now this got to tell you that there's a normal range in which this blood sugar is supposed to operate on, the minimum and the maximum. Now let's start with the minimum, and that is per liter. So per 1 liter of your blood, you are supposed to have 700 milligrams of sugar. And on the highest, and that is where you have the highest, it's supposed to have 1000 milligrams of sugar per 1 liter of your blood. Alright? Now what will happen if there is excess sugar in our bloodstream? Let me tell you an interesting fact. The body has communication pathways, or even how body organs communicate. Now in our brain, we have the hypothalamus. This is a part of the brain. Its function is to detect the amount of sugar that is in our blood, and if it detects that there is so much sugar, it will send some communication media through nerve impulses to the pancreas so that it can excrete insulin. Insulin is the hormone that is supposed to be regulating the amount of blood sugar in our body. And what that does, it keeps the blood sugar in range. We have now established that hormone insulin from the pancreas is supposed to be regulating the amount of sugar in the blood. But how so? This goes two ways. One, there's a communication between pancreas and the liver. Whenever the blood sugar is high, pancreas tells this liver, hey bro, please convert this glucose into some glycogen. I've sent you some insulin so that it can facilitate that. And that is number one way in which the hormone insulin is able to regulate the amount of sugar, converting glucose to another form of carbohydrate called glycogen, and it is stored in the liver. There is now the second way in which sugar is regulated in our body, and that is through the body cells. Our body is made up of very minute basic functional units called cells. Think of cells as the basic molecules of water. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen molecules in large quantities. Now, if you zoom in and see our bodies, you will see a single cell. Now, let me explain the action of insulin in those cells. What insulin does is that it activates some proteins called GLUT4, which facilitate sugar or the glucose to enter the cell where it is needed for the activities that are happening in the cell. And that is the second way in which sugar is absorbed into the cells, and the amount of sugar in our blood decreases and it goes to range. And now that is the function of the hormone insulin. Now let's have a look at how the body will react when the sugar level is below average or even below minimum, that is below 700 milligrams per 1 liter of our blood. At this point, the same pancreas is able to produce another hormone called glucagon, and this facilitates the liver again to convert glycogen to glucose. Glycogen is a polysaccharide, and it is broken down to glucose and other sugars. And such events happens when, say, you are fasting That's when the body is able to utilize the stored carbohydrates and convert them to sugar. And this will go as long as even 90 days. You can survive for 90 days without any food because the body has reserves for itself. Now, the process as I have described it is for a normal functioning body. That is how the normal body is supposed to function, or even to regulate the amount of sugar in its system or in its blood. However, there are people who are diabetic, and that means there's a problem between the two processes. And that is controlling their high amounts of sugar and making sure that the sugar is available when it has not met the minimums. Yeah. Now let's talk about diabetes, which is oftenly mentioned, and I'm sure you have had someone who is diabetic. Now, diabetes is a condition where the body is not able to regulate the amount of glucose in our body, and that is a malfunction. Let's talk about diabetes 1, also known as juvenile diabetes. This is when the pancreas, which is the organ supposed to be producing the hormone called insulin, fails to do the same. So you'll find that whenever you eat food, there is no controlling of that high amount of sugar, and that is where you experience diabetes 1. The symptoms of diabetes 1 are as they are on your screen. So some symptoms include being thirsty, and even you find that there are people who are just addicted to sugar or sugary food, and that is one of the symptoms. Now that is diabetes 1, when pancreas fails to produce insulin in enough quantities, or totally fails to produce insulin. There is now diabetes 2, in which the pancreas produces enough insulin. However, the body cells do not respond to the insulin, and that is why you'll find that there is excess sugar that is not being utilized by the body. And this occurs as a result of GLUT4 proteins, which are supposed to drive the glucose in the body cells, fail to do so. We have now established that proteins are very important when glucose is being absorbed or even utilized by the body. And that is why you are encouraged to be eating a balanced diet full of proteins, vegetables, and a bit of carbohydrates. And with me, I have the perfect egg. Seriously? Seriously?